Hey, I'm Doug Draper with Acme Distribution and the Denver Transportation Club. I'm pleased to present our series, Supply Chain and Logistics, The Storytellers. This series is brought to you by Cap Logistics. Cap Logistics, they're experts offering you customized transportation solutions for all of your needs, so please visit Cap Logistics today. All right, we're going to start off with an interesting topic. We're just going to call it pitchers and catchers for now, and I'll explain that in a little bit more detail. But we also want to introduce our storyteller for this week's topic, Eric Seamon with OW Logistics. So Eric, thanks for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me, Doug.
He's definitely a world traveler, and he stopped in LA today to join us on the show, so I appreciate that. Before we get into the topic in more detail, Eric, tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got in the industry, and obviously OW Logistics.
Well, Doug, I'll tell you, I got in the industry by, like most people in this industry, just by fortune or misfortune. I'm not really sure, depending on your point of view. Not very many people go into this logistics or international logistics business by design, at least when I got into it 25 years ago. Fortunately for me, this life, it has given me a life that I'd never imagined, and that was when I was 17 years old, growing up in a small town in Ohio. The fact that I'm 25 years into it, living in a place like Hong Kong, married to a Sri Lankan lady, I couldn't imagine something more different or more exciting. And fortunately for me, I've been able to, along the lines of this conversation, been able to kind of witness the growth and the emergence of China over these 25 years.
Mm-hmm.
We'll talk a little bit more about that as we get into this conversation.
That's great. That's great. Tell us about OW Logistics. Is that a company that you helped start, or tell us about that?
Yeah, so OW Logistics is a retail-focused Asia origin supply chain company. So our customers are mostly North American retailers buying and sourcing from Asia, specifically China. But because of what's happening in the economy today in China, the diversification strategies that U.S. importers are applying and deploying, we're kind of expanding outside of China into India subcon as well. So basically, it's a technology-driven order management, retail-focused supply chain company. I think that encapsulates the message well enough.
Yes, absolutely. So thank you. So going back to our topic, when we say pitchers and catchers, and we were talking about this being the start of baseball season. So the overlying topic is about China and U.S. trade and the tariffs and how things are starting to impact. And the analogy of pitchers and catchers comes from the U.S. side. If you think of it as a catcher, all of our dialogue, perspective, and feedback is from the receiving side of the cargo and the freight. And not often do we get the pitcher's perspective, which is China. And all of these different topics and influences and impacts are seldom discussed from the pitcher's perspective of what's China think of all this. So that's the idea behind pitchers and catchers, and I think it'd be a good place to start. So as we all know, the U.S. importers and China and the tariffs, it's been really interesting. It's almost like a tit for tat, where we're trying to manage the tariff situation so we can have more domestic growth. China replies with having their own tariffs, and kind of away we go. So before we get into specific questions, kind of give us an overview of what you think about what's going on with the current trade situation between U.S. and China right now.
Well, I think I can tell you that the concept is pretty simple. It's the U.S. government's their strategy is to reduce the trade imbalance. I mean, that's, at the end of the day, that's really what it is. It's also to kind of ensure that the IP rights of folks that are entering in the mainland are being protected. And I think it's a valid strategy, or it's a valid argument, and there needs to be a strategy around it. And that's essentially what these tariffs are about. I also believe that because of the size, well, let's back up. The original tariff list, which was commodities like steel and food stuff and such in August of last year, I think it was about 34 billion was the original list.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second list came out, and it was and I think it was the first week of September, and it was about 16 billion. That third list is what's really impacted companies like ourselves and really impacts the general economy, because that list went from, well, let me back up again. The first two lists were 25% additional duties on those specific products. The big list, which was 200 billion, that went into effect September 24th, that had 194 pages of line items, meaning commodities, that were impacted. And a lot of the stipulation was that that was going to be 10% additional on top of the existing duties within the harmonized tariff. So with the condition that if they couldn't get this thing fixed on January 1st, those were going to bump to 25%. That really caused this issue with the trans-Pacific space capacities, the market going crazy, which it hasn't seen since in the 25 years that I've been doing it, it's been once or twice in the last 25 years. So the general population, meaning people like yourselves and myself and our families, are the ones that are impacted most by that third list.
Mm-hmm.
And from a business perspective, that list really impacts us as a retail-focused supply chain company with 230 staff in China and 9 or 10 offices up and down the eastern seaboard. So essentially what happens in terms of the business itself, and we'll talk about the Chinese unemployment or the employment and the labor rates and such in the mainland, but because the U.S. importer was trying to forward inventory prior to those tariffs, and because the steamship lines had the ability to take capacity out strategically in that trans-Pacific lane, the contracts that were signed in May for the year between U.S. importers and logistics companies and steamship lines had a set price, and that's fixed for the year. Well, all that went out the window when production started ramping up and people were trying to beat those tariff dates of specifically January 1st because of the unknown. So I'll give you some numbers, just general numbers of our business. Our volumes 2018 compared to 2017, transactionally, were up 24%. Our gross profit was up 2%. Our pre-tax profit was down 11%. So, and a reason for that, and I think we're pretty normal in our industry. The reason for that, of course, is more volume running through in the year, trying to get it in before January 1st, people not living up to their promises in the summer and switching volume to somebody like us. Mm-hmm. But the margins decreasing dramatically because, of course, the costs went up dramatically, and you were faced with passing along those costs to your customer or absorbing them. And depending on the relationship, you have to make some hard decisions. So,
yeah, interesting. So, yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. So when you say that, essentially what you're saying is and I'm just keeping simple terms, if it's $1,000 to bring an ocean container in, it just jumped to $1,500. You as a partner were participating in that cost savings and say, all right, well, we'll cut our margin as a transportation provider to help you, Mr. Customer. Is that what you're referring to?
Exactly right. So you were exactly right. So you've committed to a year, and most of the people we do business with are friends. I mean, over time, this is a pretty small incestuous business where, in a sense, that you're working with friends in the beginning, and then you become friends over time. So to commit to something, it's like you're doing that to your wife or your children. You commit to something, and then things get really sketchy, and you have to live up to that commitment at the end of the day. Mm-hmm. It's been we're fortunate because of our financially we're stable and we're backed by asset-based financiers, but there are some folks in this industry that are small to medium sized that couldn't withstand it. And you've seen a lot of third-party logistics companies, small manufacturers in China go out of business. And it's unfortunate, but, you know, it's the lay of the land, I guess.
Yeah. If you don't have a good cash flow, I mean, if you're, you know, hand to mouth and how you manage your business, I can definitely see how customers and service providers would be walking a thin line right there. I want to take a quick step back on the 25% duty, so just our audience understands that that's on top of the normal duty. Is that correct?
Correct. That's on top of the normal duty. And I'll give you an example of that. We do a lot. We have a sourcing business. Yeah, we have a retail apparel sourcing business as a sister company. A lot of the U.S. retail or import duties on apparel are anywhere from 25 to 40%. So you can imagine what happens when somebody introduces a 30 or 25% increase to that. Mm-hmm. You know, the boardroom conversation about diversification begins pretty quick, as opposed to the creeping of the labor costs in China and that impact on product. So it's really sped up this conversation about where do we diversify from, and who can make product as well and as efficient.
Right. Have you seen? So really, there's a couple things in play. The labor rates in China are obviously increasing as the country becomes more westernized, or if that's the right term. And then you got an amazing duty rate that's so astronomical. Have you seen clients look at other sourcing strategies, to look at other regions of the world to manufacture the apparel or their hard goods or soft goods?
Yeah, for sure. And again, back to that original conversation, it has always been one of those situations, and we, you know, again, we've been on both sides of the fence from an importer's perspective and a seller's perspective and a logistics provider perspective, that it's always been a conversation that year by year the labor rates go up in mainland. The government tries to adjust currency to kind of compensate for that. Mm-hmm. But it's never been a real, okay, wake up, we can't control any of that. So we really need to have a conversation about diversifying our sourcing base. And so, yes, the answer to that is in apparel, for example, you're seeing a lot of it move to Indonesia and more into Bangladesh and India and Sri Lanka and places like that. Fortunately, I'd love to say we're the smartest guys on earth, and we were, but we actually got lucky in a sense that, you know, we have a finance director, for example, that's Indian. My wife is Sri Lankan. Our sourcing business is based in Malaysia and Indonesia. So we kind of got there a little bit earlier than most. Right. But the fact of the matter is, people are, the market is such that it's moving rapidly, and it's you know, being dictated by the board now.
Mm-hmm. So your business is a little ahead of the game, diversifying out there. Have enough companies looked at other sourcing strategies that has had any level of impact on China? Are they reacting to say, oh my gosh, this is really a concern, or they're like, whatever, we're not that concerned about sourcing strategies going to other markets?
They're definitely concerned. It's interesting. They're definitely concerned. The small to medium-sized factories, for example, live off of, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, or they essentially live off their export tax refunds. So if you're a small to medium-sized manufacturer of apparel in Guangdong province in the south of China, you typically don't make money on the product itself and the sale of the product itself. You're making money on the refund that the government gets back to export the product.
Interesting.
And so, yeah. So as the government will put in measures to combat the tariff situation, such as a reduction of the VAT from 16% to 13%, which is it impacts the large guy in a positive way, but the smaller to medium guy, the 3% doesn't mean much. One, he can't take on big orders because he doesn't have the credit facilities or the cash. Two, but 3% of 50 million versus 3% of $500,000, is a different animal. So the other thing that's happening, which is really interesting to me, is it used to be that if you were Target stores, for example, you would buy a fair amount of your product FOB, meaning you would own it when it got on the ship in Asia. And then there was some product that was bought landed, meaning the supplier paid for it, owned the inventory, delivered to your DC in the US in, say, Minneapolis. About 15 years ago, the president or CEO of Target would walk through their stores. It was a very common story, and looked at product and picked it off the shelf and said, and looked and made notes that said, if this is made in China, I want to find out if it's landed or if we bought an FOB. If it's bought and landed, we need to change those terms. We need to negotiate that and own it from point of source in. Well, right now, what's happening is because of this risk aversion, not only are importers changing their sourcing strategy from China amalgam, but China out into, again, India subcon, South Asia, South America, but they're considering going back to changing terms again to push the risk, the inventory ownership, and the transportation and logistics back on the seller, which I haven't seen that trend in years. So whether that plays out fully or not, we're not sure, but we're being asked to do that from our apparel sourcing group. So
interesting.
Interesting enough, yeah.
Yeah, it kind of makes sense, right? So I'm going to buy this garment for $10, and I'll give you a $1 increase, but I'll buy it landed $11 in LA. It's your problem to deal with, with the taxes, the transportation, all that kind of stuff. That definitely makes a lot of sense. Speaking of transportation, let's kind of flip the conversation over there and talk about how the trade has impacted the cost of goods, the ocean freight or the air freight specifically from China over to the U.S.
Well, it's I would say the cost of transportation, it was such an anomaly last year. It was such an odd year that year on year, it wasn't, so 2017 to 18, there were moments of the year in 2018 that, comparatively speaking to the year 2017, it was between an 80 and 90% increase from, for example, Shanghai to LA or Shanghai to New York, right? Now, that sounds like a lot, and it is a lot, and it's hard to stomach as a U.S. importer because you've budgeted plus or minus 10% what you agreed to pay in May for the year. But that wasn't really the biggest challenge. There's a lot of customers of ours, for example, that it was a beating to absorb that. A lot of our customers, fortunately, we had the financial wherewithal to protect them from that. But what we hear in the market, and we've benefited from this to a degree because some didn't have the financial wherewithal to do it, to manage that, and they're coming back to the market to bid their business out. And they're doing it for several reasons. One, of course, they didn't want to pay more than they agreed to in May. But two, that we've heard stories that some of the sizable importers, not just the guy that moves 1,000 containers, but guys that are moving 10 to 15,000 containers, were getting rolled at a 3 to 5% rate. So roll meaning...
Yeah, thank you. I was going to say, what does that mean to the audience?
Yeah. Roll meaning you make a booking with a steamship line for 30 containers or an airline for 10,000 kilos of air freight, and it's decided that it's going to hit that plane and arrive in that city in Dallas and deliver that DC at all cost. And they agree to use that aircraft or that steamship line for that sailing and that arrival, and it doesn't get on. The reason they agreed to it because it had an advert date that it couldn't miss, right? Or the snow was melting in the PNW and the snowshoes needed to be there, and thus they would fly it there to get it there on time, and it misses you. Now you've just missed a sale. and it really, really crippled people. And it shell shocked a lot of the importers, um, again, to a point where right now the market is such that if you didn't perform as a steamship line or a logistics provider in 2018 in fall and winter, you be prepared, because people are looking.
So you said 3 to 5% bump rate. Is that what you said?
3 to 5%, yeah, and you know it's not uncommon in a peak season, which is August and July, July and August, when people are trying to get product in for Christmas. But 3 to 5% across the board for the year, not very good.
Okay. Yeah, because to me, 3 to 5, it doesn't seem too bad, but generally that doesn't happen. So that is a big increase, is what you're saying.
Very much.
Gotcha. Gotcha. So what do you think will happen with the freight costs? You know, everybody was rushing in to get their product landed before the tariff rates. Now they're in place. So that rush may perceive to be over. Is that the case, or what do you expect to happen here in 2019 when contracts are up in May?
I believe that the market will settle to a more normal situation. The unknowns are what happens with the trade negotiations with Xi Jinping and Donald Trump, which I think that will reveal itself soon in the form of an announced meeting between these two gentlemen. Simply because it's pretty commonly known that the Chinese government doesn't do what happened with Donald Trump and the North Korean boss. They don't call meetings without things being resolved, signed, sealed, and delivered. So the minute that you hear that Donald Trump and Xi Jinping have arranged a meeting, a face-to-face, I think we'll know that at that point we're settled and ready to go. The other unknown is the steamship line's ability to pull capacity out at strategic times to prop the market up. I don't believe that will happen, but I was wrong last year, so we're not really sure. What I think is going to dictate a lot of it is what you see in July and August. If consumer demand and the U.S. economy is strong, that should get the steamship lines in a healthy space for the next 12 months. Yeah. And to be honest, we're hoping they are.
Yeah.
We need them to be healthy, and we're hoping that all happens.
Yeah. So another wait and see kind of thing until those conversations happen. So we just have another minute or so here. So if in your position, what advice would you give an importer here in Colorado that's making some apparel for the outdoor industry or something like that? Give me one or two little bullet points here in our last minute as far as advice.
Well, if I would certainly be looking at diversifying as much as possible. In some places you can, and some people can, and some people can't, depending on the product. Diversify their sourcing base, and to a degree, diversify if you haven't thought about it before in terms of your logistics providers. If you are already too diversified in terms of your logistics providers, I think you need to reverse that to be important to someone. You certainly need to have options, but you certainly need to be important to someone. And that's it's essentially what we do with our service providers and our sourcing base. So,
yeah. Interesting. I mean, kind of the golden rule, right? Find some good providers and friends that you can trust, and like you said, be important to somebody. So that's really good advice. So, Eric, I can't thank you enough for joining us today. We could really elaborate on this topic, but I think we did a nice job to set the realities of what's going on. So, again, Eric, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Excellent.
Appreciate it very much.
And I want to thank our audience for joining us today as well on the Connect and Collaborate Network, featuring supply chain logistics, the Storytellers, brought to you by Cap Logistics, and we've had a great storyteller today. Thanks again. We'll see you next time.